I thought I had hit the jackpot when I found that high-performance bike on Facebook Marketplace. It was one of those expensive models you see in fancy stores, but the guy was selling it for less than half the price. His profile looked legit too. A common name, family photos, even some old posts. He suggested meeting at a local park for the exchange, which made me feel better. It was a public place, and I didn't want a stranger knowing where I lived. But now, looking back, I get chills thinking about how naive I was. I arrived at the park right on time, carrying the cash in my backpack and trying to look confident, even though I felt a little uneasy for no specific reason. He was there, just as he said he'd be, but he wasn't alone. 2 other men were hanging out nearby, leaning against a bench. I tried to tell myself they were just friends or random people, but the way they stared at me, like they were sizing me up, sent a chill down my spine. The seller, who looked older than in his photos, smiled and got straight to the point. "Go ahead and test the bike, but the best place is down that path. It's quieter there." He pointed to a trail that disappeared into the trees, far away from where anyone could see. I glanced at the trail and immediately felt my stomach twist. It was the kind of path I'd avoid even on a normal day, let alone with 3 strange men I didn't know. Trying to buy time, I pretended to adjust the seat and inspect the bike. "It looks great," I said, forcing a smile. My heart was racing, but I tried to act as casual as possible. Meanwhile, the other 2 men started moving closer, casually but deliberately, like they were closing in. My mind was racing with every worst-case scenario, and I knew I needed to figure out a way out of there fast. I decided to flip the situation and suggested something different. "Actually, my friend's on her way. She knows more about bikes than I do, so I'll wait for her," I blurted out, completely making it up on the spot. The 3 men exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. One of the guys closest to me frowned. "How long is she gonna take?" "We don't have all day," he said in a flat, impatient tone. I knew they wouldn't buy that story for long, so I pulled out my phone and pretended to text someone, trying to act like it wasn't a big deal. "She's almost here," I said casually while secretly turning on my live location to send it to a real friend. The seller's confident demeanor started to crack a little. "Look, we're trying to help you out here, but if you don't want it, just leave," he said, but the tone of his voice sounded more like a challenge than a genuine offer. I took a deep breath and realized I couldn't show any fear. With my hands sweaty and my heart pounding, I forced a smile and replied, "No, it's fine. I'll just wait a little longer. Don't want to test it alone." That seemed to bother them. The 2 men standing nearby stepped back slightly, but the seller crossed his arms and stared at me like he was trying to figure out his next move. "The trail's safe, you know? No one's gonna bother you down there," he said again, but his voice wasn't as confident as before. It made me think my bluff was starting to work. I kept stalling, hoping something would shift in my favor. Then I noticed a couple walking toward us in the distance, far enough away not to hear anything but close enough to see. An idea hit me. I spoke up, making sure my voice was loud enough for anyone nearby to catch. "Oh, she just parked. Let me call her real quick to find out exactly where she is." I could feel all 3 of them pause for a moment, like they were weighing their options. The tension in the air was suffocating. As they hesitated, I unlocked the bike and got on it, trying to act casual. "I'll just take a quick ride here and be back in a sec," I said, already planning to leave the area entirely. The seller took a step toward me like he was going to stop me, but I raised my voice and called out, "Hey, can you wait a minute?" I wasn't talking to them. I was aiming at the couple who were still walking toward us. I needed to create the impression that I wasn't alone anymore. My heart was racing as I slowly pedaled toward the couple, trying not to look panicked. Once I got close enough, I stopped and pretended to adjust the handlebars. "Hi, can you help me out? I need to call my friend, but I left my earbuds in the car," I said, my voice shaky but trying to sound normal. The woman looked a bit confused, but she nodded and handed me her phone. I didn't actually need to make a call. I just needed to stay near them. As I pretended to dial, I glanced back and saw the 3 men still standing there, talking quietly among themselves. It felt like hours, but finally, they started walking away toward the parking lot. I stayed close to the couple until I couldn't see them anymore, and even then, I waited a little longer to be sure they were gone. I handed the phone back, thanked the couple quickly, and rode straight out of the park, not looking back once. When I got home, I locked the door and sat on the floor, shaking. The bike was there, perfect condition and all, but I couldn't even look at it for days. To this day, I still don't know what those men wanted, but I'm just glad I didn't find out. And I've never, ever bought anything from strangers online again. I really needed a cheap printer, just something simple to print my college assignments. I mentioned it in a campus group, and this guy messaged me saying he had an old one for sale. He said it was an older model but worked fine, and the price was ridiculously low, so of course I was interested. He seemed a little reserved but friendly enough, so we agreed I'd pick it up from his dorm room that night. Honestly, I didn't think much about it. It just seemed convenient to get it over with. I got there at the time we'd planned, around 8 p.m. His dorm was on the other side of campus, in a building I wasn't really familiar with. When I knocked, he opened the door right away, like he'd been waiting for me. His room was practically empty. No decorations, no books, nothing that made it look like someone actually lived there. Just a bed, a desk, and a chair. The printer was in the corner, but he didn't mention it right away. Instead, he started asking me questions. If I was a freshman, what my major was, where I lived on campus. He seemed curious, but there was something off about the way he asked, like he was analyzing my answers. As I answered, I started noticing his behavior. He seemed way too relaxed, like he had all the time in the world, which was weird considering he was supposed to be selling me something. The vibe in the room was strange. It was small and poorly lit, with a flickering bulb that added to the unease. Something felt wrong. When I asked about the printer, he changed the subject, saying something like, "Oh, it's pretty old. Do you have room for it in your dorm?" The question seemed harmless, but the way he said it made my stomach churn. He started moving closer to me, and that's when I noticed something that made the whole situation even creepier. There wasn't a single study-related thing in sight. No notebooks, no laptop, not even clothes scattered around. Who lives in a dorm room without any signs of actually being a student? I tried not to let my discomfort show, but my brain was already coming up with excuses to leave. He kept asking questions, and now they were getting more personal. If I lived alone, if I had a lot of friends on campus. With each answer, he seemed more interested, but not in a way that made sense for someone just trying to sell me a printer. My mind started racing, trying to figure out how to leave without making it obvious I was freaked out. He was standing near the door, kind of blocking the way, and the tension in the room was unbearable. I mentioned I was in a rush because I had a paper due, but he brushed it off completely and started talking about how quiet his dorm area was at night. "It's pretty peaceful here. Not many people walk around these halls after 8 p.m., he said with a half smile that didn't feel friendly at all. That's when it hit me. He was testing me. The questions, the empty room, the weird vibe. It didn't add up. I got the sinking feeling that the printer was just an excuse to lure me there. I decided to end it. I told him I didn't have cash on me and needed to hit an ATM first, hoping he'd let me leave. But he didn't move. In fact, he took a small step back, almost like he was deliberately keeping me from getting to the door. My heart was pounding at this point. I noticed a backpack propped up against the wall, and the zipper was partly open. Inside, I saw the handle of a kitchen knife sticking out. I could feel the panic rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. I acted like I hadn't seen it and took a step toward the printer, pretending to check it out. "You know, I think I'll come back another time," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'll need help carrying it, and my roommate's busy tonight." He stared at me for what felt like forever, the smile completely gone from his face. Those few seconds dragged on, but then he shrugged and said, "All right, if you need it, you know where to find me." His tone was colder now, almost threatening. I grabbed my bag and walked out as calmly as I could, but the second I hit the hallway, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Building was almost completely empty, and every step I took echoed like an alarm. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him standing in the doorway, watching me. That feeling of being watched made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone and pretended to make a call, hoping it would deter him from following me. Once I turned the corner and was out of his line of sight, I picked up my pace, practically jogging. I made it back to my own dorm without looking back, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness. That night, I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if he had planned to rob me, or worse. The idea that he used a fake marketplace ad to lure someone in was what really stuck with me. The next day, I checked Facebook Marketplace, and the ad for the printer was gone. I never saw or heard from him again. But to this day, every time I buy something online, I can't help but think about how differently that night could have ended if I hadn't managed to leave when I did. It all started when my husband and I decided to sell an old set of chairs on Facebook Marketplace. We got a bunch of messages, but a guy named Daniel was the first to confirm his interest. He seemed polite, maybe even friendly, and asked about the condition of the chairs before scheduling a time to pick them up. On the agreed day, he showed up with a van, paid in cash, and complimented the chairs, saying he liked vintage furniture. It felt like a normal transaction, nothing weird at all. A few days later, on Friday night, we went out to dinner at a friend's house. By the time we got back, it was almost midnight. As soon as we walked in, something felt off. The house was eerily quiet. Then, I noticed the back door was unlocked. My husband tried to brush it off, suggesting we might have forgotten to lock it, but before he could finish, we heard a loud thud coming from the living room. We froze, staring at each other, and in that instant, we knew someone was inside our house. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. My husband gestured for me to stay put while he grabbed something to defend us. He ended up picking up a kitchen knife. I tried to call the police, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely dial. Then, we heard heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. Whoever it was, they weren't in a rush. They were taking their time, almost like they wanted us to know they were there. That's when we saw his silhouette in the dim light of the hallway. It was Daniel. He was holding something in his hands, but it was too dark to see what. My husband stepped forward, shouting at him to get out, but Daniel didn't flinch. He just stood there, staring at us, like he was trying to figure something out. After what felt like forever, he took a step toward us, and my husband's hand holding the knife started to tremble. That was the moment I finally managed to whisper to the dispatcher on the phone, praying they'd get here in time. As I spoke to the dispatcher, Daniel took a few more steps forward, just enough for the kitchen light to partially hit his face. His expression was blank, emotionless, like he wasn't even human. My husband yelled again, telling him to leave, but Daniel didn't react. Instead, he gave this small, chilling smile and slowly started walking toward the back door. It was like he wasn't in a hurry, like he was savoring the moment and enjoying how scared we were. We heard the sound of wood creaking as he disappeared out the back door, probably jumping over the fence. We didn't dare follow him, terrified he might be waiting to ambush us. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Every little sound made me jump. Finally, the flashing lights of the police car lit up the street, and we ran to open the front door. The officers rushed in and started checking the house, but Daniel was long gone. All they found were muddy footprints leading into the yard. Even with the police assuring us he'd left, I couldn't shake the fear. They asked if we knew who might have done this, and when we mentioned Daniel, they suggested filing a formal report and upgrading our home security. What haunted me the most was the way he acted inside the house. So calm, like he had planned it all. This wasn't just some random break-in. It felt way more deliberate, but none of it made sense. Since that night, we haven't slept the same. Every little noise makes me jump, and every slow-moving car feels suspicious. We never saw Daniel or his van again, But knowing that someone who was inside our home is still out there keeps me on edge. We changed our locks, added cameras, and swore off selling anything online. To this day, I can't shake the image of him standing in the hallway, staring at us with that empty look. He didn't say a word, and maybe that's the scariest part. The unanswered questions are what keep me up at night. I was just starting to adjust to my new life alone. After the divorce, I had to build my home from scratch, and honestly, I didn't have the money to spend on brand new furniture. That's when I started browsing Facebook Marketplace and came across a wardrobe that looked perfect. It was simple, in good condition, and the price was almost too good to be true. The seller, an older guy named Mr. Arthur, responded quickly and suggested I come by his garage to pick it up the next day. He seemed friendly enough in the messages, maybe a little too friendly, but I thought, it's just a wardrobe. What's the worst that could happen? The next day, I drove to the address he gave me. His house was on a quiet street, kind of out of the way, but nothing felt off at first. When I arrived, he was already waiting by the garage, smiling. The wardrobe was there, just as promised, and it looked like it was in great shape. While I was checking it out, he started making small talk, asking why I needed furniture. When I mentioned the divorce, he made a weird comment, something like, "You'll need more things to start over. Maybe even some company." It made me a little uncomfortable, but I gave an awkward laugh and tried to brush it off. That's when he insisted I come inside to check out some other furniture he had in the back of the house. I hesitated, but he seemed harmless, so I went along. The vibe inside the house was completely different. It was small, cluttered, and had this strange smell, a mix of mildew and overly strong cleaning products. He walked ahead of me, rambling on about how every piece was unique. I tried to act interested, but something about the place felt off. The interior doors all had padlocks on the outside, and I remember thinking, why would anyone need to lock doors like that inside their own house? Then I noticed some dark stains on the floor near the kitchen. When he realized I was staring at them, he quickly kicked a rug over the spots like he was trying to hide them. That's when I started making excuses to leave. I told him the wardrobe was all I needed, but he kept insisting I take a look at more furniture. Out of nowhere, he started asking me these really personal questions. Do you live alone? Is anyone waiting for you right now? Alarm bells were going off in my head. He was just an old man, but the way he was talking gave me chills. I began inching toward the door, pretending I had to take a phone call. As I reached the exit, he stepped in front of me, still smiling, like everything was fine. My heart was racing. I tried not to show it, but the whole situation was getting unbearably tense. He kept smiling, but there was something in his eyes that made my skin crawl, like he was studying my every move. You seem nervous, he said casually, which only made me more on edge. I glanced at the garage door, slightly ajar, and started planning my escape. No, I'm just running late for something, I lied. He tilted his head like he didn't believe me, but then he stepped aside, letting me through. As soon as I got back to the garage, he started talking louder, almost as if he was trying to stall me. Wait, I can help you with more furniture, give you a better deal? I didn't look back, just muttered a quick thanks and kept walking. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so much I could barely get the key into the ignition. Then I noticed him standing at the garage door, just watching me. The smile was gone, and his expression was different. It's hard to explain, but the way he stared at me made it clear I needed to leave as fast as I could. I drove straight home without checking my rearview mirror, but the uneasiness followed me. It wasn't just about him. It was everything about that house. The stains on the floor, the padlocked doors, none of it made sense. When I got home, I sat in my car for a while, trying to calm down. I'd already decided I didn't want the wardrobe anymore, even if he offered it for free. But the thought of messaging him to cancel made me uneasy. Something about him told me it was better to just disappear without explaining. Still, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was overreacting, imagining danger where there wasn't any. I decided to text him and say I couldn't come back for the wardrobe, but as I was typing, a message from him popped up first. "You forgot something important here," it read, followed by a photo of his garage. In the picture, there was an old, worn-out hammer sitting on a table. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before. What really sent shivers down my spine was the background of the photo. You could clearly see my car in it, leaving his driveway. That photo froze me. He had taken it while I was driving away, and the way he framed it, making it seem like I'd left something behind, felt like a trap. I didn't reply. I deleted the message and blocked his number immediately. But the uneasiness didn't go away. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I found myself checking the windows over and over, staring out at the street, but everything seemed normal. Even so, I locked every door in the house and left a few lights on, just to feel a little safer. I never heard from him again, but that day still lingers in my mind. I keep replaying everything that happened, wondering what could have happened if I'd stayed longer or let him lure me deeper into that house. Those stains on the floor, those locked doors, what were they hiding? Sometimes I think about reporting it to the police, but what would I even say? There was no crime, just a gut feeling. One of those feelings you know you shouldn't ignore, because deep down, something in your brain is screaming that it might be your only chance to get out alive. If you enjoyed the stories, subscribe to the channel for more content like this and leave a like to support our work. Thank you.